there is a feeling here when it comes to these international issues, when it comes to Iraq or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is that, no, here there is something which is wrong. And it's not only about misunderstanding.
To what extent would you say that the Palestinian, that Hamas, the cause of Hamas, was not that specifically of Palestine, but is itself is a part of a much wider conflict? That is, that Hamas would see itself as in conflict not just with Israel, but would see itself as part of a wider conflict between Islam and the West. Of course, the wider conflict, what has happened in Iraq, Iran's position in the world and Iran's stance towards the West, these things are bound to colour, are they not? Mm-hmm. The perception of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, because the two things are linked in some way.
Yes. Okay. What is your reaction to that?
I think it's very interesting because you said you don't particularly know what the answer to this is, and I think this is one of the key things, is that we don't actually find that answer. We just sort of have that kind of idea being somehow trickling down through news coverage, and it's very much in the culture, and oftentimes all it is a simple question, or going away and reading the answers in a press conference, and you'll find all these answers from Hamas, but then what you then get is then another layer of suspicion when it comes to reporting and reporters. And this is also ties in with the way Muslims are represented in the British media, which is that Hamas can effectively say they're supporting a two-state solution. They've always have been, and as far as I know, always been very Palestine-oriented. But somehow they're not believed. Somehow, there is something that we find very suspicious about these people. They're not quite just the human being that you can ask an answer of, the same way you might ask a civilian and believe what she's saying.
But Arzu, is it not true? Is it not true that Hamas is funded by much of its funding and support comes from Iran, and that from the Iranian perspective, the conflict in Gaza is part of a much wider conflict. Is that not true?
Yeah, I think again we're getting into this kind of...
This is not really the topic.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think it is important because it gets down to this point, is that at some point somebody has to ask the question.
Yes.
They get the answer and then they're not believed. And I think you can even take that further with Iran. With all respect to them, whether you agree with different facets of a very complicated sort of state. This is not kind of one guy running a whole country. They have elections, they have all sorts of different legislatures, etc.
Yes.
These kind of nuances are not really something that we understand. We kind of just see this as a civilizational fight. And that's what's scary, that, every point, whether it's Muslims as a fifth column in the UK or Palestinians perceived to be Muslim, and in fact they are multicultural.
Yes, it's all about suspicion. And by the way, just to react on this, objectively and historically speaking, Hamas is much more connected to Egypt. The one who wants now to connect Hamas to Iran is exactly the Israeli current government. They want it to be connected, and this is also something which has to do with geostrategic interests. But this is not our discussion. Let us come back to the discussion. I wanted to react on this covering. Do you see a connection between the way Muslims are portrayed in the Western media and what is happening in the way it's covered, the conflicts are covered in the Middle East, for example?
Well, I think definitely. Virtually anybody who's been to university now as Muslim has read Edward Said, and there is this sense that this is an ongoing process, or a historical legacy from colonialisation, that we are constantly turned into this monolithic idea. So even when we start talking about what's happening in those conflicts on the other side of the world, the impact here, with the generation of people like myself who are born here, I'm not an immigrant here, I'm not a Muslim in the West, I am a Muslim of the West. And so those...
I'm not talking about the impact, I'm really talking about the process, the mindset, the perception of this conflict with biased, with something which is not only misunderstanding, with a political take on the way these conflicts are presented to the Western audience.
Well, I think the BBC, and when I work there, and even now I still continue to work with them, there is a sense of objectivity, that one tries to be objective. And at some point you kind of decide, well, who are you? Are you a journalist who is trying to put across a British perspective, or are you just a journalist who holds true to the notion of journalism, to try to be as fair as possible to the situation? But in this situation now, who do you believe in terms of what's coming out, what's going on? And I think there can be a notion of that your good journalism is when you manage to get beyond what is the press releases from the Israelis or even from Hamas, and you understand really that actually on the ground this is what is actually the perception. I think you just need to look at what happened with the Hutton report. Yeah, it works both ways. We had the situation where they found the dossier, they said there was no weapons of mass destruction, there was no 45-minute threat. Here was the person who could prove that actually this was all cooked up, this was made, and here was the BBC trying to say the government have lied to us. And what happened? The head of the BBC was taken down by the government.
So what is your conclusion?
In a way that is, as a Muslim, it's very easy to be cynical and say these institutions are in the pay of the government or they're controlled by the government. Sometimes the government itself is the victim, feels it is the victim of the BBC, and so we'll try to do that. When it comes to Fox News or when it comes to some of the other channels, well, we know that these belong to particular individuals.
And we know that
they are owners, they have a particular viewpoint, and then they say, well, there's a free market out there. If you do not want to consume this, it's your choice. Switch over and watch the other side.
Okay.
So this is actually, perhaps leading to a very dangerous situation that we're now finding ourselves into.
So what would be the solution from within? If you have to talk to your own, public services, what would be the solution?
Well, I think if I can just be allowed to map out what's happened. I mean, to me now we have the emergence of what I call a digital ghetto. So suddenly we all have the access to say, I can have my own channel, I can have my own blog, I can publish my own newspaper. So now you have hundreds of people competing against each other. So you can have every perspective you choose, and in front of you is this buffet of information and news.
Is it positive or not?
I don't think it is, because there was something that we inherently had, particularly in Britain, that you call the national conversation, that you trusted this was actually a very balanced perspective, and I think that's been eroded. That has been eroded. Some of it's been eroded by business, by digital choice, by technology has eroded that. So the danger becomes that, actually, and I think people need to ask themselves this, if I only watch a Muslim channel, if I only watch a Pakistani channel, and my view is the view from Islamabad all the time, have I got the right view? Would it be helpful to look at the other side, to see how they see things? And where is that place where you have a very unbiased sort of, trying to find that balance? And I think still, despite my criticisms, I think the BBC still tries to uphold many of those values. But you can only see by, particularly when we're talking about the issue of Muslims, we're talking about the issue of minorities in this country, people, they have given up. They do not watch it and they do not trust it.
I mean, as I said, when we actually sat down and surveyed people in this country, they felt, yes, there's a lot of media bias. They were very upset about it, but it wasn't that kind of level of paranoia that you described.
It's not a paranoia. It's the majority Muslims are thinking that the Western media are biased, and it's not by accident. It's not a lack of understanding. There is a very political
institutionalized phobias, whether they're racist or religiophobic or whatever, at the end of the day, there's a political culpability for that.
Okay.
And I agree with you. I mean, I think it's about engaged citizenship and getting, particularly public broadcasting, to kind of start reflecting the concerns that we have. But the problem is you need a partner for that, because minorities are weak. And what we've seen, at least in this country, over the last, say, 20, 30 years, a little bit more, we've seen huge improvement in representation of Jewish community. We've seen a huge sea change in the way homosexuality is considered. Okay, these minorities have been understood, and their perspective has been very much incorporated. It's become very mainstream. People within media organisations understand when they talk about certain things how this would affect members of these communities.
So not just two communities, other minorities are doing better?
We have a precedent. Some have done better, and we have a precedent we can follow. But the thing is, there has to be a partner within media organisations that understand this. And at the moment, we're even lacking sort of the courageous journalist to walk out and say, I'm really disgusted by the coverage over Gaza. I walk out and I object.
I think that we have been able, during this discussion, just to tackle some of the issues. And first, to go beyond this victimization and to think that it's only with Islam. It's something which has to do with other religions. It has to do with all the minorities that they are facing discriminations and biased coverages when it comes to the media. But at the same time, there is a crucial question here. It's about the intention and that the political views that we can have. And here we had a discussion which is we cannot avoid thinking that, yes, there are political trends and there are political coverages that we have to take into account when it comes to this discussion. So to be much more involved as citizens and to be the voice, and especially in the West, in the public services, this is something which is very, very important and crucial. I'm afraid that's all we have got time for today. Thanks to all our guests, Arzu Merali, Rabin Keenan, Naveed Akhtar. If you want to join the debate or suggest another topic for us to discuss, our email address is islamandlife@presstv.co.uk. That's islamandlife@presstv.co.uk. See you next week, inshallah.